Thank you for joining us for the Ministry of the Word at Redeemed Christian Fellowship in Phoenix, Arizona. We hope the Ministry of the Word will be a blessing to you.
Hello, welcome to our Sunday afternoon live stream. Thank you for joining us and being with us today. It is Father's Day today, so I want to say a special happy Father's Day to all the dads here, especially my wonderful husband who does not like compliments. You ever notice that about Dave? He will definitely divert your compliment. So he has to take it right now. Happy Father's Day.
Thank you.
I know.
You're such a great dad.
All right, let's jump into this teaching.
And also, real quick, happy Father's Day to our pastor, our beloved pastor, who is a wonderful father in the faith, and we love and appreciate him very much. So, we have been teaching out of Pastor Walter's manual on women of faith. This week we are talking about Esther. So we're going to talk about we're probably going to split it into two parts. It's probably the longest chapter of this book, so we're going to start with the introduction to the book of Esther. When it comes to understanding the book of Esther, it's important to have some insight into the laws that the Jewish people were subject to while in exile under Persia's oppressive rulers. Also, we must understand that the cultures of the time that they were in were very different than they are now, especially in captivity. Yet there's still a lot we can glean from the book of Esther and can apply it into our lives as far as spiritual laws go. So now, all of Persia itself, which also included the Jewish people, were subject to the king's religious beliefs by law. The king's religion held to the belief in a supreme God over all other gods. This, of course, went against what the Jewish people believed, who trusted in only the one true God. He is all-powerful, all-knowing, and the creator of all things. There are no other gods, according to, obviously, Jewish beliefs, and so that contradicted what the king believed in. So when examined carefully, you can't help but notice that we have largely taken into consideration the book's historical and cultural settings, which will help aid us understanding the heart of the book of Esther. So now, we're going to start at the beginning of the book of Esther with Queen Vashti, where she falls from her queendom. The book of...
I don't think that's a word.
I know it's not. That's why I looked at Monica, because she's sitting right there, but it sounded fun. Okay, so the book of Esther. It's not what the book says. I was just being silly. Okay, so anyways, the book of Esther starts off with the event that led to the fall of Queen Vashti because of her vain ignorance. Wow. So her disposition was shaped by pride, which is always blinded to the consequences of its own vanity. In contrast, Queen Vashti and Queen Esther were worlds apart, for Esther never let her position go to her head. She remained loyal, pliable, and courageous, yet cautious and full of wisdom. So Queen Vashti thought, highly of herself. She thought, she let the pride of her position go to her head, and it caused her to fall. Whereas Esther was very humble, very wise in her approach to the king. So King Ahasuerus, I read that right the last time I read this, but I don't think I read that right just now. So ruled over Persia. His queen was Queen Vashti. She is recorded as being very beautiful, and through the course of time, she was invited to a banquet that the king was having to display his wealth. It was for that banquet that he commanded that Queen Vashti come dressed, wearing her royal crown to show the people and the princess her beauty, but she refused to come. Obviously, he wants to display his wealth, and he wanted to show off his queen, so he called for her to come. Now we're going to start in Esther chapter 1.
So in verse 10 through 12, it says, "On the seventh day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Maham, Beztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abitha, Zethar, and Carcath, and the 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king. Boy, the names. Cabanera, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princesses her beauty, for she was fair to look on. But the queen Vashti refused to come at the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger burned in him.
So Queen Vashti had become consumed with her own self-importance, even above the king. It's interesting, because she would not be who she is if it were not for who he was.
Mm-hmm.
So you could say that she became blinded by her own own sense of self-importance and pride. As a result, she ended up disrespecting the king and his 7 advisors, which were his servants or the princes. The king's anger burned, which is described as becoming wroth. That means that he became intensely angry. That's a good description of how angry he was. So Queen Vashti had embarrassed the king in front of his advisors and brought shame and a sense of awkwardness throughout the feast. So the king asked his advisors, which were the princes that Dave greatly read the names of, what he should do, for she had violated the laws of the land.
Verse 16 says, What shall we do unto the queen Vashti according to the law, because she hath not performed the commandment of the king by the chamberlains? And Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Vashti the queen hath not done wrong to the king only, but also to all the princes, and to all the people that are in the provinces of the king.
So the result of her actions and the way the king and his advisors responded was that she be removed from her royal estate and that her position should be given to someone else.
Verse 19 says, If it please the king, let there go a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the, is it Medes, or Medes, that it be not altered, that Vashti come no more before the king, and let the king give her royal estate unto another that is better than she.
Who's better than she? It's interesting. Her own pride and selfishness are what caused her fall from the king's grace and set the stage for Esther to come forth. Now, obviously, if that had not happened, we would not have been introduced to Esther. But it's her own fault that she fell from the grace of the king. So it is helpful to understand the role of Mordecai and the making and developing of Queen Esther in the plan of God for the preservation of his people. One has to see how Esther was brought up and raised in order for her to reach that place where God was able to use her to deliver his people. For instance, when she was brought into the king's palace, she became very observant, obedient, and respectful to the guidance of her keeper and adhered strictly to his instructions and advice, which contributed to her being selected, for the keeper knew exactly what the king was looking for. Mordecai was responsible for raising his uncle's daughter. So Mordecai wasn't her father, but she was related to Mordecai, and so he helped raise her. So we're going to pick up in Esther chapter 2.
In verse 7 it says, And he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother, and the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter.
So the scriptures characterize Mordecai as a highly receptive and spiritually perceptive individual. He not only took on the role of a father figure in Esther's life, but he also became a spiritual advisor or father to Queen Esther as well. So he raised her as a father would raise a child, but he also spiritually raised her as a spiritual father. So Esther herself showed a great deal of respect for Mordecai and was able to spiritually perceive Mordecai's counsel as coming from God. She trusted him in the same way that we trust our pastor when he counsels us and advises us. She trusted Mordecai that he knew how to hear from God, and so she trusted that it was coming from God. She was spiritually receptive, showing that she took on a great deal, if not all, of Mordecai's spiritual characteristics. It was Esther's upbringing, her training as a child, as well as her gratitude for being raised up by Mordecai and not left without the loving care of a parental figure and protection. As a result, she became very loyal to Mordecai and his spiritual insight.
In verse 20 it says, Esther had not yet showed her kindred nor her people, as Mordecai had charged her, for Esther did the commandment of Mordecai like as when she was brought up with him.
So because of her upbringing, she had to have developed a sense of spiritual awareness under Mordecai's guidance and instruction, not just as a father figure, but as a spiritual father as well. It's interesting to know that God knew all of this about Esther when he chose her. He knew her upbringing, he knew her character, he knew her understanding. And so there are a lot of things that contributed to her success that God already knew about when he chose her.
Mm-hmm.
So she became obedient to the truth when she heard it. And as we will see, even at the risk of the cost of her own life, she had developed an overwhelming empowerment of faith and obedience to truth, which makes her one of the most insightful, spiritually perceptive women of faith out of all the women that we will cover. She was willing to give up her life and to sacrifice her life. She knew what the cost was, and she was willing to do it. These are just some of the characteristics she had to inwardly possess to walk out God's divine plan and delivering power, which can only come by faith in order to preserve God's people from annihilation. That's what they were facing. She had to have within her the ability to be loyal, grateful, obedient to the truth, respectful, spiritually perceptive, and to honor those over her.
In Esther chapter 3, verse 1, it says, after these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes that were with him.
So let us address in part the rise and fall of Haman and his plot to annihilate the Jews, which was brought about by his hatred and anger towards them. Haman had become so useful to the king that he was placed above all the king's advisors. However, it's interesting because you see how on one side Haman is scheming and plotting, and it seems as if the devil's placing him in a place to try to annihilate God's people. And he's being raised up and promoted, but yet on the other side, God's already got a plan in place to preserve his people, and he's raising up a woman of God that he can trust to do what he needs done in order to save God's people. So, however, it must be noted that in a lot of ways he struggled like Queen Vashti with his own self-importance, except that his hatred and anger was channeled towards the Jewish people, which also caused his fall, for he had launched a plot against God's people.
In verse 8, it says, and Haman said unto the king, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom, and their laws are diverse from all people. Neither keep the king's laws, for therefore it is not for the king's profit to suffer them. If it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those who have the charge of the business, to bring it into the king's treasury. And the king took his ring from his hand and gave it unto Haman, the son of Hammedatha, and the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. And the king said unto Haman, the silver is given to thee, and the people also, to do with them as it seemeth good to thee. Then were the king's scribes called on the 13th day of the first month, and there was written according to all that Haman had commanded unto the king's lieutenants, and to the governors that were over every province, to the rulers of every people of every province, according to the writing thereof, and to every people after their language, in the name of the king was written it and sealed with the king's ring.
So these passages of scripture are very, very revealing when it comes to exposing the king's mental and moral characteristics, for it takes a very cold or calloused-hearted individual to go along with the annihilation of a whole group of people simply because their laws were different than other people's who honored the king's laws. However, the Jewish people quietly broke with the king's laws concerning their worship. Their behavior alone could lead to serious consequences. So there were so many in number that they were scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of the kingdom. This type of ruler has no value or respect for human life and was capable of genocide. He was allowing it to happen, which means that he had no problem in deliberately exterminating or killing a whole group of people, willing to wipe out the existence of the Jewish people along with their culture, traditions, and heritage, which also included their way of believing. it was this type of individual that Esther the queen would be facing in order to reveal her true heritage and identity as a Jew. And remember, we talked about in the history of this in these times that his beliefs were in many gods, and they had different, and he had different beliefs than the Jewish people, and so that was one of the things that he brought up. These people are scattered abroad, and they have different beliefs than you, and he's bringing that to the attention of the king. So this is where Esther's faith is being put to the test.
This is now in chapter 4, and verses 1 through 3. It says, When Mordecai perceived all that was done, Mordecai rent his clothes, and put on a sackcloth with ashes, and went out into the midst of the city, and cried with a loud and bitter cry, and came even before the king's gate, for none might enter into the king's gate clothed with sackcloth. And in every province, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, there was a great mourning among the Jews, and fasting and weeping and wailing, and many lay in sackcloth and ashes.
So, in these verses, the Jews mourned over Haman's plot to destroy them. Queen Esther was exceedingly grieved by Haman's hatred and plans to annihilate the Jews. Esther was shown the decree by the king's chamberlain that was given to destroy all the Jewish people. You can see that in verses 4 through 6. Now we're going to skip ahead to verses 7 through 8.
Then Mordecai told him of all that had happened unto him, and of the sum of the money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasury for the Jews, to destroy them. Also he gave him the copy of the writing of the decree that was given to Shushan to destroy them, to show it unto Esther, and to declare it unto her, and to charge her that she should go in unto the king to make supplication unto him, and make request before him for her people.
It is important to know that there was a decree or law that was in place that said no one can see the king unless they were invited, and unless the king would hold out his golden scepter in acceptance. You can see that in verse 11. This is extremely important when we take into account the kind of pressure that Esther was being placed under that led to the trying of her faith. This is why we said she was willing, she knew the cost, and she was willing to do what she needed to do. It could cost her her life. She loved Mordecai and she loved her people. However, the king was difficult to approach. First, you had to be summoned, and then you had to be accepted. Failure to meet these requirements was met with severe consequences. We already know he's kind of a hothead, and obviously very hard-hearted, doesn't care about killing a whole group of people. And she knows all of this about him as well before she goes to face him. So in the face of all this, Mordecai reveals to Esther that no one, including her, will escape Haman's wrath and the king's decree.
Verse 13 says, Then Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, Think not with thyself that thou shalt escape in the king's house more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall there an enlargement and deliverance arise from the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed. And who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this?
You can hear his faith in God and God's ability to deliver them. He knows that, hey, you're put here for a reason, but if you're not going to do what you need to do, God's going to bring deliverance from somewhere else, but you won't be delivered. So he knew that this was her time, that God had called her there for a specific reason, and he was encouraging her not to think that she's going to save herself if she holds her tongue and doesn't do anything about this. So Esther's response and request revealed the strength of her faith in God.
Then Esther bade them, verses 15 through 17, Then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer, Go, gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat nor drink 3 days, night or day. And also, I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so will I go into the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way, and did according to all that Esther had commanded him.
If I perish, I perish. This was her willingness to do what was asked of her. There are 3 defining statements found in these verses. 1 was given by Mordecai, and 2 were given by Esther that revealed her underlying faith and trust in God. which meant that she could not keep silent about her heritage and Haman's plot to destroy her and her people. In the face of annihilation for himself and all the Jewish people, Mordecai reveals to Esther her appointed destiny. Who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? This defining statement was in reference to her position as the queen and her relationship to the king that was seen to be a position of honor and favor. It was also a statement that was referring to the deliverance of God's people and that could lead to securing their existence. In verse 15, Esther requested a fast to be honored by all the Jewish people, that she would honor herself as well as her servants. Fasting was always set in motion when deliverance was being sought by God's people for their preservation. So that was a specific purpose for fasting. They were fasting for the purpose of seeking deliverance and preservation for God's people. The second statement was as a request made by Esther and was also very revealing, for it revealed her loyalty to Mordecai and the people of her heritage, as well as her dependency upon God for deliverance and for preservation. And after the fasting days were completed, she said, "So will I go in unto the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish." So she was willing to go in, even though she knew it was against the law, even though she knew she could get in trouble, she was willing to do it. And if I perish, I perish. I think we're going to pause here and pick up next week, where she obviously begins to act out her faith. But was there anything that you wanted to add?
Nope.
God is good. Thank you for joining us and being with us today. I hope that all of you fathers have a very happy and blessed and prosperous Father's Day. We love you guys. We will see you on Thursday night.
Thank you for joining us today. If the ministry of the Word has been a blessing to you, please consider contributing to the work of the ministry at www.redeemedcf.breezechms.com/give/online. You can also text to give by texting the amount you would like to give to 602-962-3848. If you have a testimony of how the ministry of the Word has been a blessing to you, please send us a message on one of our social media platforms. We would love to hear from you. Thank you for your continued support of the work here at Redeemed Christian Fellowship.